All right. Sound on. And we should be good. All right, folks. So tonight we're going to do a little debate. Should be fun. With Counterpoints, who I've talked with on panels before, but who I don't think I've ever talked to directly one-on-one before. So that'll be interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. So, damn bastard, can't keep up with all this live streaming. Well, don't get used to it. Board right now says, good evening, big guy. Well, thank you. I am sure that was meant for me, despite my small stature. Tobin J. Stone says, damn, you're really on a grind this week. Thank you. Kite says, is your opponent respect-worthy or demented? Well, I'll tell you this. My opponent has found my critical weakness ahead of time. He recently mentioned me in a video and had nothing but nice things to say. So, we could be in for trouble tonight. It's the fellow who did the video that Destiny watched yesterday. So that should be fun. Hey, I'm glad you like the background. Yeah, I hooked up a screen, and I hooked it up to a spare computer I had, and I just, I've been using it for moving backgrounds. I thought this would fit in with the vibe, the purple lighting and all that, So we are going to be debating counterpoints tonight, not contra points. Counterpoints tonight. It's going to be fun. Let the stream schedule continue. We'll see. Vitarian says, I'm glad I made it in time. I'm doing well, Vitarian. How are you, buddy? What's going on? I may, I've got a spare webcam here for the debate, but I'd rather use the nice camera for it, because the decline in quality is so noticeable. So I may default to just, whatever the, the Discord call for the videos. That may take a minute, but otherwise, it should be good. All right. So I'm going to hop on here to this call in just a minute. Not having two high-quality cameras. Well, the camera that I am being filmed with here right now costs, I think, a total of $1,600. So just the one for now. Maybe when we start making the big bank bucks here on Twitch, maybe. Tax write-off net gain for the top 1%. True. I don't know. I just normally spend the money on other stuff. Greenest Hue with a shutdown argument here. Open borders means more thick Latinas. That's the end of the argument. All right, so it should be fun. We'll see where it goes. And we'll go from there. All right. So with that, turn the music off and hop into the Discord call here and see what's going on. All right. I'm going to shut off the video capture device here, though, first. Let me make sure I've got the... let's see. Okay. Right screen on here? Okay. All right. I'm going to shut off the video camera here. Hair did get bigger. All right.
Put a neo-Nazi tattoo here. Then on the other half of my head, I have like Bastiat's pompadour, and then like if you lift up, it's like an undercut, right? And then you lift it up, and then you see like the globe tattoo right here. So.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, Bastiat, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm trying to get my hair to your level, but I don't think that's ever gonna happen. So
well,
it doesn't seem like.
Don't give up yet,
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Right.
How was what was it? Where did you do the thing with Vosh at? What was that place called?
At the Freer Future Fest in Nashville, Tennessee. It was a lot of fun.
Nice.
I think it went pretty well. I got to meet a lot of libertarians. Got to get something approaching plastered with Vosh and Destiny, albeit on different nights.
Together? Oh, that I was gonna say.
Vosh learned his lesson on that one a little sooner than Destiny did. But, as an attorney, I know how to hold my liquor. So
Perfect.
See, I get two drinks deep, and then I start talking the real shit. So you know,
Really?
you gotta fucking
Oh, yeah.
man, do you want me to go grab some beer?
Oh,
yeah.
no, I mean, that's
Bastion,
yeah.
I was saying this before you came in. He's going real right wing tonight because he just shaved his head. Right, he's a couple tattoos away from being,
You know,
Well,
you
I don't
know,
know though. He's got a beard, which suggests a little bit of thoughtfulness that I think is.
suggests law enforcement. That's what it suggests. Like, don't ever buy
Yeah.
drugs from somebody who looks like this.
Are you?
This
Is this what a Fed looks like? I know a lot of people on the internet like to accuse other people of being Feds.
So cops can't like grow beards as a part of their job. So whenever they go to like the narc detail, they grow their beard, and then they're like, I gotta, make this acceptable somehow, and then they shave their head. So this is what a cop looks like when he's trying to buy drugs.
Is it really? You can't have a beard as a cop?
No, I mean, depends on jurisdiction, right? Like if you're in the Northeast or something like that, and it's cold as fuck, they might let you
What
do it.
is the?
But
what's the rationale there? I know, like the military, they got gas masks and stuff. That I guess that's.
yeah, it's just some of the older departments want you to look
Yeah.
more professional. You know,
Oh, I gotcha.
yeah,
Alright.
they haven't caught up with the hippy dippy private sector.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
that's true.
All right,
Yeah.
All right, well, that's cool. Hey, what kind of flag is behind you, Layman? Is that the flag
This
of
is
Nova
the-
Scotia?
That's right. That's where I live. Yes,
All right.
it's a flag in Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia.
The best flag, the coolest flag, my
Yeah.
personal favorite flag.
It
So,
is a flag.
It is a flag.
That feels like a lawyer undercut where it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
Oh.
it is the thing.
Well, actually,
I
it
know-
reminds me very much of the flag here in Florida. That is a red saltire with the state emblem on it. So.
You know,
Nice.
I'm in Florida too, and I actually I didn't like the state flag originally,
Yeah.
and then I checked out the history, and it actually does incorporate all of the history of all the demographics of Florida.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It does. Yeah. It's the design to me is just not very aesthetically pleasing.
It's not, but the St. Andrew's cross is the same cross from the House of Castile, which were the original Spaniards who settled the state. Then there's a Native American woman in the foreground, representing like that this was predominantly like a Native American settlement. And then the steamboat in the background is supposed to be representative of the early colonists. So it actually is Anglo-European colonists, Native Americans, and Spanish, which is, while not aesthetically pleasing, it's representative of the state as a whole as far as from like a historical perspective.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
it's actually pretty cool.
Yeah,
That's cool.
I can appreciate that. I don't know. I guess I don't know. I'm a little too aesthetically focused, I guess, on that one. There's an old flag in Florida that is not is never officially used except for one day, and it's called the Let Us Alone flag. If anybody wants to Google that flag, it looks like a plate of vomit. And it just says, "Leave us alone." And unfortunately, I found out later on that "Let us alone" was a reference to "Don't mess with our slavery." But other than that, I think
Sounds
this
about
flag,
right.
in pure aesthetic terms, I think this flag really screams Florida. And I'll have to drop a link to that in the chat here. I have to share that with you guys because it just is so. Here it is. I'm just gonna share that real quick. It's really just.
Are you both just before? Are you both streaming right now? Have you both started streaming?
I have.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Right after you show that, we will do what we came here to do. So.
All right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just dropped it in the chat, but yeah.
I'm live. I'm not looking at my chat, but I'm live as well.
That's a good idea. Okay, so let's get started. So, hello, my name is Layman, and I'm very excited because today I have with me two people who I respect quite a lot on this platform, debating open borders. We have, on one hand, we have Counterpoints, the enlightened, 800 IQ, conservative, centrist of the debate today. On the other hand, we have Bastiat, the chief neoliberal shill, the best neoliberal girl boss since Margaret Thatcher herself. So Bastiat,
I'll take it.
so So, yeah, we have both of these gentlemen here today to debate open borders. And just so everybody watching is aware, the way that. So, I gave them a definition of open borders, and I'm just going to give the audience the definition that I basically gave both of you, just so everybody knows what the hell we're even talking about. Basically, what open borders are, they are borders that are essentially defined by basically free movement of people between borders, incredibly lacking substantive border control over who is allowed to cross those borders, if any at all. So that's what they're going to be debating about. They're going to be debating about whether or not that is a good thing for our globalized world to head in, if that's a good direction to head in. Yeah, basically, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, who they are, very briefly, what their political leanings are, and they will then give their arguments and their thoughts on the topic, and then after that, we'll have an open discussion, and I will moderate it if necessary. So, yeah, I'm going to let you go first, Bastiat, then I'll let Connor go after you. So, Bastiat, take us away.
Okay, well, so my name is Bastiat, and I think Layman did a very good introduction. I'm generally on the liberal side of things, and yeah, I'm streaming here on Twitch, so it's great to be here. Thanks, Layman, and thanks, Connor, for the opportunity to talk with you. So, as far as open borders go, perhaps the term, perhaps we need a new term for this, free movement of people or something, but generally speaking, I would agree with your definition, except I would say that, as it's generally understood, there's still a border that you cross through and a checkpoint. It's just that the government can't stop you unless it has a really good reason. So no longer would it be able to stop you purely based on your nationality. It could stop you if you were, carrying a disease, or if you were carrying some kind of, destructive device, or if you were a member of a terrorist organization. But 99 out of 100, or really many more people than that, will be able to get through just fine to work, to live, and to do all the other things that everybody else does in an ordinary life. And it is my belief, and I think it is generally supported by the evidence, that more immigration has been for the United States, and I am primarily interested in the United States, less interested in the benefits to the world writ large, although I think they're probably also quite clear. Whenever the United States has had high rates of immigration, high rates of people being able to come to the country to live and to work and to thrive and to prosper, the country has grown explosively and been a beacon of freedom and prosperity for the entire world. By contrast, when the United States has turned its back on this history, as it did, for example, in the 1920s, as it did in the 1880s with the Chinese Exclusion Act. When it has done so, it has hurt itself economically. It has gone against its own founding principles as a melting pot of peoples, an asylum of mankind for all the world, and it has done so to the detriment of its own people, to the slowdown of its economy, and ultimately, I view most immigration restrictions as self-imposed wounds that we would be quite fortunate to avoid. And so, generally speaking, I think we need to have, or would at least benefit from, far greater rates of immigration, not just because they would benefit our country, not just because they are in line with our country's founding principles, our history, and our culture, but at the end of the day, because it is purely and simply not the government's business to hire armed thugs to stop peaceful people from crossing borders that should be defined as existing to stop the reach of government and not existing to stop the reach of peaceful people. So generally speaking, I'm pro-immigration, and it's great to be here.
Wonderful. Connor, you may give your intro.
Okay, my name is Connor. I run a YouTube channel named Counterpoints. I identify as centrist or center-right. I definitely have a way more strict perception on government authority and security and how we organize as sovereign nations. I think that, sorry for moving my mic and making weird noises, but basically what I would say is that governments are administered based on regional influence. They have the ability, like the reason why we have counties, the reason why we have cities, the reason why we have states, the reason why we have the federal government is because they're all able to wield some level of influence within a territory. That regional power is based off of the ability to understand the people that are around it and for those people to, pay taxes, receive social services, And on top of that, basically for that area to be secure, you can't have social mobility or economic mobility or anything like that if you don't have some level of security. And that's really my main concern is when we look at the amount of damage that just a few dozen people can do, whether we're talking about like terrorist attacks, mass shootings, even cyber attacks, intellectual property theft, all the things that are kind of facing us in the modern era as far as nefarious actors, you have to have some level of control. And we're really going to get into that because the thing about it is, yeah, sure, great. Free, peaceable people who want to travel the world and be nice and contribute to the economy. Awesome, right? Like, we all love those people, right? Here's the problem, though. You don't know who that is until you talk to them. The government is not clairvoyant. They're not psychic. They don't know who's who until they check a social security number or an ID, name, date of birth, social media history, who they're affiliated with, and all that kind of stuff. Also, I don't think that liberalism is genetic. I don't think people are born and they're just like, oh, mixed economy, capitalism, and individual rights. That sounds based. Let's just do that for everywhere all the time. And I think if you look at history, and if you also look at, all of the sovereign nations of the earth, liberalism and liberal democracy and republicanism and mixed economy capitalism is more, it might be a global hegemon, but it's still wildly unpopular in certain parts of the globe and parts of the globe that want to destroy it. I don't want to open myself up to that kind of vulnerability. And also on top of that, Bastiat very specifically was saying that like he's only interested in United States politics. That's cool. That's great. But at the same time, when you look at our competitors, if they maintain an advantage and then we give them a vulnerability, they will exploit that vulnerability. I'll be happy to get into that in the open, but I feel like I've already been ranting for 5 minutes straight, so I'll just shut up for now.
Well, I would say that we are now entering the open. So, which one of you would like to go first? I'll.
Well, yeah.
Who has the most to say? Okay,
if you want to keep going, or otherwise,
yeah, I want to.
If you just want to,
jump on it. I don't want to rant. I want to ask probing questions because basically, I feel like in order for us to disagree, we got to kind of firmly root what we're talking about. So you were saying that at the border, it's not the government's job in order to harass peaceable, economically productive folks or whatever. How do you have any kind of border control that enforces some kind of security without basically verifying who's coming in, who's coming not, stopping cars, talking to people, searching cars, all that kind of stuff? How do you enforce a border that has a security apparatus while not harassing peaceable, freedom-loving, economically savvy people?
Well, any kind of government searching and probing and investigating and opening people's trunks to look through their cars and all that is a kind of harassment, of course, until somebody has been proven guilty of some kind of crime. But even if you imagine a very strict regimen in which these people are waiting for 2 weeks at the border, while some federal agent goes through every single one of their social media posts. I mean, you're comparing that right now with processes that just bleed on into years, sometimes a decade. Right. So even if you're talking about some very strict procedure like that, where you are really just taking a fine-tooth comb to everybody and you're forcing them to get the COVID vaccine and wait for 3 weeks, or wait for 2 months, to get both doses for them to kick in, whatever you're doing, right? Even if you have a very high standard there. The point is to say, once you've done your background check, I think, we might disagree on the specifics of what kind of background check you do, but even if you imagine, I think, a very rigorous background check, once you've done that, and you found nothing, that's it, right? You don't get to say, you stay out for economic reasons, or you stay out because we're worried about our culture, or you stay out because we're worried that, there aren't enough resources to go around, whatever form this criminal background check or whatever might take, that's it, right? There's no, and of course it might often not take that long. For example, somebody coming from Canada or Britain or the European Union or our East Asian allies, these countries have very advanced systems for tracking criminal activity and things like that too. There's no reason we couldn't come to some kind of bilateral or a multilateral agreement with them to say, we'll take your word on these kinds of documents, you take our word on these kinds of documents if we thought their standards were good enough. So there's certainly no reason that this kind of stuff would have to take so long. But even if it did, it would be a lot faster, a lot fairer, and a lot more economically useful than the kind of just years-long slog that we have today.
Okay, so that's interesting because I think we can parse these things out. So if we were talking about like allies or countries that were like similar culturally, mixed economy, capitalist republics or whatever, I don't know if you care about capitalism. I care about capitalism a little bit. Mixed economy capitalist republics who have a decent safety record when it comes to, sorry for the dog noises, when it comes to, I don't know, like liberal republicanism or human rights or anything like that. If you wanted to put that on the fast track, that's totally fine. My question is more like when we're dealing with, failed states. So Central American countries that have high rates of violence, high rates of drug activity, high rates of, things that we don't like. And I'm not saying like zero immigration. I'm just saying, how does that fit into your worldview? And then also similarly, you brought up an interesting point about culture that I don't want to miss. You were saying that culture is irrelevant, but at the same time, I don't divorce economics from culture. So, for instance, if somebody was a tanky or a simp for the CCP, and they literally wanted to have 300 million Chinese folk immigrate overnight to us and then vote in, authoritarian communism democratically, that's technically possible under your system. So where are the checks against these kinds of things that, while might be extreme hypothetically, aren't necessarily addressed by your first principles?
So first of all, that is very extreme hypothetical. All the research suggests there's no more than 100 to 150 million people who, if they could come to the United States tomorrow, would come to the United States tomorrow. And second of all, if we're going to talk about culture or what people want, I don't believe there are 300 million people in China that would that would come to the United States and then vote for the Chinese Communist Party system that they are presumably leaving to escape. So unless we're imagining some kind of, Manchurian candidate sort of situation on steroids, I think that situation is just not really one that's really worth considering. I mean, that's just not how people operate. I mean, even if you don't believe in some kind of universal liberal worldview like I do, I mean, ultimately, I believe the forces that are agitating against liberalism, democracy, Republican values, and small r Republican values, and capitalism are fundamentally state-based, not individual people acting against them. But even if, you raised a few points here, so let me respond to all of them. Even if we set that aside for a minute, did you just say that you're fine with open borders from our allied countries like Britain, France, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand? All those countries were cool with it? Because that would be a great start. I mean, if we agree on that, that's almost 1 billion people able to travel, freely back and forth everywhere. I mean, if you're cool with that I think would be a pretty useful point, because that would deal with a lot of that would be, these are cultures that are very different in some ways, even if we share a lot of values in common. So, I mean, was that what you were saying there?
Well, so yeah, let's break that down a little bit. There's a favorite saying of mine. It's from a very progressive movie called Full Metal Jacket about the Vietnam War, where one of the generals says, inside every young Vietnamese person, definitely doesn't use a racial slur right there, there is an American. And what I think about our allies, even though I think they can be quite cucked on things like guns, freedom of speech, all that kind of stuff, there is a certain amount of cultural compatibility when you talk about like liberal democratic republicanism. So when you talk about South Korea, when you talk about France, when you talk about Germany, when you talk about the UK, when you talk about even some Central European countries, there's already kind of like a cross-pollination of like civic virtue that I think is pretty easy to articulate. I don't think it would take more than a generation to educate people on like the American political system. And if they wanted to come here and be like, oh yeah, I want to participate in that system, that seems like the regional, the regional place that I want to participate in. Yeah, awesome, great. People from allied countries who share similar civic social institutions who want to shoot guns and eat McDonald's, fucking based, right? But my concern, so for instance, like this is the main problem that I have with like freedom of movement arguments, is that there are certain cultural tropes and cultural traditions that I absolutely reserve the right to enforce. As an example, like Central and South America, even Spain to a certain extent, animal fighting is viewed as like a cultural norm. Whether you're talking about like bullfighting, chicken fighting, dog fighting, anything like that, it's viewed as a cultural norm. It's socially accepted, morally acceptable. I wouldn't want to bend any of these rules for people who are coming in and just say, oh, well, we're just going to accept animal cruelty because these people come from a different culture. Absolutely not. And on top of that, there would be certain standards that if we were talking about this like 1 billion people who would be able to cross across borders, there's certain standards that I would want them to update to. So, for instance, like if we're talking about like Malaysia, who's ostensibly an ally, Thailand, who's ostensibly an ally, all those kinds of places. Some of these places operate what's effectively like sweat and slave shops. They have labor practices that outcompete the American model. They have labor practices that are morally questionable. They have safety standards that are morally questionable. I would say that any country that wants to be part of this, like, I don't know, free world circle jerk of liberal, democratic, mixed economy capitalism would have to update to the moral and ethical and civic standards, in that is a part of culture. You said that like culture doesn't matter. I think that those civic and social standards are a part of the culture. And if you want to be a part of that system, then you have to abide by those standards. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, but we already have laws against everything you just described. I mean, whether they're just or
Here?
not. Yeah, here. And they're going to come here, presumably. I mean, that, none of that changes. I mean, the laws would still be enforced, presumably. I suppose there's the possibility that these people would, you imagine they might vote differently. They might vote to keep the things they're presumably trying to leave behind. They might vote for some small part of them. I mean, but ultimately, even if you're right, there's some possibility that they'll vote to legalize chicken fights or whatever. I mean, I think you'd even if that were true, I think you'd have to weigh that against. You'd have to weigh that against every other possibility. But the research suggests that that's just not true. Like, what are some things that immigrants are coming to the United States and then voting for to recreate the societies in which they've left? All the kinds of pernicious practices that you might describe that come from different parts of the world, like, say, I don't know, honor killings, for example. I mean, there's never been any proposal to do that. Sharia law, never been any proposal to implement that. In fact, people have preemptively banned it. In several states, that was kind of a cause célèbre. The critical race theory before critical race theory. Yeah, like states like Oklahoma and the Midwest that have banned Sharia law. Even though there was never any serious consideration of it, because it's a popular political cause. The same way this critical race theory stuff is.
Okay, Bastiat, but I respect you. I respect your intellect, all that kind of stuff. I don't feel like when you're bringing these things up, you're being disingenuous. But I think that there's a lot of nuance to the things that you just said.
Okay.
Oftentimes, when you're talking about like Sharia law or let's just go ahead and bite the bullet that a lot of uncomfortability when it comes to immigration is from the Middle East and North Africa, right? Let's just bite the bullet on that.
I mean, I wouldn't honestly bite that bullet. I think it's the entire world. I think there's a lot of bias among Americans against foreigners generally. I think most people would actually be opposed to immigration even from many of the liberal democratic countries you mentioned because they're worried about economic spillover effects. So I don't concede it's like just
true. I do. Okay, listen, true. I am bigoted against Europeans. We can acknowledge this, okay? But the point is, let's nail this down.
Okay.
Because very specifically, like if we were trying to come to some kind of like agreeable understanding, at least of each other's perspectives, and from an incrementalist worldview, you were like, hey, nations can have sovereign rules like laws against animal cruelty and all that kind of stuff. But if you meet a certain threshold of like economic productivity, legal standards when it comes to like workers' rights and pay, and civic virtue when it comes to like mixed economy capitalism and liberal democracy and all that kind of stuff, you can join some kind of like expedited cross-border travel union where you can join the club, right?
Yeah, like the European Union.
Sure. Okay. So let's just go with that as like an incrementalist implementation of your plan, and then let's move to more of the extreme stuff that I think that most people are concerned with when it comes to this kind of rhetoric. Okay.
Well, I mean, to be clear, what you just described is basically the European Union, where they can come there, they can live and vote and all the rest of it, and I mean that's kind of what I'm talking about. Or like the United States, even really, where you just move somewhere and you instantly can vote. You can go from California to Texas or Texas to California. You can bring your weird cultural standards from each of your respective states and instantly vote as if you've already lived there all your life. So that's basically what I'm talking about.
Okay, well, I think the reason why I'm comfortable enough signing off on these kinds of things is because I think there is a certain amount of like cultural cross-pollination that like leads to a certain amount of like obvious integration, right? I actually lived in Belgium as a child. I lived there for 4 years when I was 8 to 12. I speak French as a second language. I went to school in France. I got my ass kicked in France, French. And so as a result, like I actually, while difficult and while people were dicks to me, there was a certain amount of integrated process that was logical, made sense. Like there were so many civic institutions that made sense, like linguistic. The language was the largest challenge. After that, figuring out a few cultural nuances, it wasn't that big of a deal to integrate into that society. The where I want to push back though is because I feel like you just glossed over a bunch of information when it came to the Midwest and like Michigan and other places that have preemptively banned Sharia law, where there are states who have accepted large amounts of immigrants from places like Somalia. And on top of that, if you look at Pew Research polling and if you look at the support for either Sharia or suicide bombing or cultural tropes that I think are completely counter to the United States of America, the support is like shockingly high. Like I think in Pakistan, support for suicide bombing civilians in the defense of Islam is at like 3%, and in the Palestinian territories like Gaza and the West Strip, it's as high as 70%. I don't give a fuck who you are. If you think suicide bombing civilians in the name of any reason is an acceptable moral thing, I don't want you in my fucking country. So that's kind of the thing where it's like these things aren't arbitrary. They're not fluid. Like this isn't. I mean, you're giving me weird eyebrows, so go ahead. Tell me.
Even that, the 70% figure. I mean, so does that mean the other 30% are just like, sorry, you're screwed? And that's basically what you're saying there, right? I mean, if you're in that 30% that, maybe has adopted some of these values, suicide bombing is wrong and it's cringe and peaceful resolution disputes in a democratic system is based,
That's the thumbnail. That's a thumbnail right there. Suicide bombing is cringe.
And that's your opinion, and you're in the Palestinian territories. You're just, you're out of luck. Sorry, buddy. Your neighbors feel this way, so you may be an individual. No. Wait. This seems to be what you're saying, right? If you're saying that we should make this decision based on, like Pew Research polls conducted in, say, the Palestinian territories, or at least that should be one factor of consideration, it seems like we're really losing the individual here. I mean, it's almost like why even bother checking, what somebody's background is at that point if we're already saying, look, some of these cultures, they're just not compatible. It doesn't really matter about the individuals at stake, the individual here, because 70% of them responded in a poll, and they feel they feel otherwise,
Yeah, but to be clear, to articulate my standard, because you kind of assume my standard.
Okay.
So, like I said, in my very progressive, very woke movie, Full Metal Jacket, inside every young Vietnamese person, there's an American. There's a presumption that like our values are ultimately correct, whether you're talking about like human rights or liberal values or small R republicanism, mixed economy capitalism, like some level of free market, all that kind of stuff. There is this presumption that these morals are correct, and I think that's defensible. I also think part of the reason why they're defensible is that because they're potentially universal. It is a moral system that can encompass people from different religions, that it can encompass people from different languages, all that kind of stuff. I think but I think it brings up like the paradox of tolerance, right? You can tolerate everything except for intolerance. So for me, if let's say like the entire West Bank like tomorrow was like, hey, we want to move. The entire West Bank wants to move to the United States tomorrow. They want to immigrate to Miami, some shit, right? And what I would say is, okay, but we're gonna vet the dog shit out of your history. Okay. We're gonna coordinate criminal investigative organizations in your country. We're going to vet your social media history. We're going to ask you a shitload of ideological questions about what you believe about economics, culture, civic institutions, liberal democracy, all that kind of stuff. And if you meet a certain threshold of incompatibility, then I'm sorry, you're just going to have to stay where you are. And I have no problem saying that. I don't think people are entitled to like some kind of like random free-for-all vagabond lifestyle across the entire planet. I think sovereign nations, especially when it comes to security, have the absolute right to decide who is going to come into their country. And on top of that, if a different sovereign nation, almost wrapped up, I promise. Yeah. If a different sovereign nation, based off of like Westphalian sovereignty, where people are able to control their borders and control their own outlook, if there was a country like Poland, for instance, who has faced a lot of historical oppression, and they decided that like we want to keep a certain cultural, ethnic, linguistic makeup of our country, we're not going to kill anyone, we're not going to purge anyone, we're not going to hurt anyone, but basically we're going to control these borders. I don't give a fuck. That is their right to do as a nation to decide collectively.
Yeah. I will say, just to kind of get this out of the way, and just to kind of make my position on the question of nations very clear, and, I will address everything else, and I imagine I will still talk, in the framework of nations here, because that is the framework of the world we live in. But I will say quite plainly that I do not give a fuck about the existence of sovereign nations and primarily, especially outside of the bounds of the United States of America, I do not care in the least. Sovereign nations, that is to say the United States, are constructs used to better realize the ideals that I believe in. So I grant them no value inherently. I do not concede that they have any rights. And if I had a better way to guarantee the survival and the perpetuation of the ideals that I believe in, I would destroy them all tomorrow. I have no value placed on the nation or on the legitimacy of the nation or the rights of nations as opposed to the rights of individuals. So Westphalian sovereignty is a fine international standard to the extent that it helps realize the individual rights that I hold to. But beyond that, to the extent it counterbounds, or rather counteracts or countermands those individual rights, I am happy to dispose of it or to violate it as I see fit. I view the United States as the core of a liberal project, a liberal international order that is fundamentally universal by nature and will someday lead to the ultimate liberation of all the peoples of the world into some state of the highest possible imaginable freedom. So just to be clear, while I recognize that nations exist and we have to deal with that world, I do not grant them any legitimacy. I certainly do not grant them any rights. And those concepts are useful only insofar to me as they advance the individual freedom that I believe in. Indeed, that's why I believe in the United States as thoroughly as I do, because I believe it's a useful institution, a great engine for realizing those rights, and it should be celebrated and appreciated for that reason, but not because it has some notion of sovereignty that grows out of the 30 Years' War. You know, I don't care about any of that. So I do want to make clear that that's my feelings on the question of sovereign nations. They are tools, and to the extent they work against what I want, I am happy to annihilate their sovereignty. So I do want to say that before I respond to the points you made, just to kind of lay my point out on sovereign nations. You mentioned the paradox of intolerance, or paradox of tolerance. I think that's Karl Popper's idea, that we have to be intolerant to people who will be intolerant of us. And ultimately, what we have done in the United States to resolve that is to enforce laws equally. We have not had to take the approach of the Europeans or the people in, I think, other countries around the world where we have had to ban certain speech or ban certain types of people, or we have had to banish certain types of political opinions. We haven't had to do any of that because we have been very successful at the equal enforcement and equal protection of the laws. And that's all you need to do to ultimately have a democratic and free society in the most diverse country in the world here, politically, ethnically, religiously, here in the United States. That's all you need to do, is equal protection and enforcement of the laws. You do not need to treat different groups differently. You don't need to screen out certain countries or other countries. Indeed, for most of our history, we didn't do that. For most of our history, we were quite liberal as to who could come here. And it is a relatively, comparatively recent development that we have stopped doing that. And it is a surprising thing, indeed, given that, we are not just some mere nation, which is another reason that I'm so, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful of you. I'm purely talking about the idea, why I'm so disdainful of the idea of nations and national sovereignty. The United States is no mere nation. It is something approaching a global empire that has a culture that has basically been adopted in some part, by almost all the people of the world. Its reach, in terms of its music, its movies, its culture, is mammoth and gargantuan and perhaps impossible to define, certainly far and away exceeding any culture that has ever existed before it, and perhaps will ever exist after it. So the idea that Americans have this, unique culture that other people in other parts of the world have not had exposure to, no, every single day, people all over the world are being brought in, pre-acculturated, primed in very real and enduring ways to become better immigrants, better potential immigrants at least, through their exposure to American culture, their exposure to the internet, which is still thoroughly dominated by American platforms and American norms and standards. So America is a very unique nation, to the extent it even counts as a nation in that respect. A very unique country, I think we could at least agree on. Because, people can come here and already have a very deep and abiding understanding of what it is to be an American, to our culture, our high ideals, even if they don't have a great understanding of how their local city government works. And it's worth noting that that's something that ultimately not only can be learned, but which many Americans themselves do not have, and which we certainly wouldn't demand of Americans before saying, well, for example, before you reproduce, before you spawn another human being, we must make sure that you're not going to spawn the next mass shooter, because, of course, we do know that the vast majority of crimes in this country are committed by native-born Americans, even on a per capita basis. And we have to make sure that you're not going to commit crime, that you're going to be a productive person, that you're not going to be the next terrorist, the next Ethan Rogers incel going on a rampage against all those girls who didn't talk to you in high school. I mean, of course, we would never set that standard for people born in this country. And the only reason we set that standard for people in the rest of the world, who come here after birth, as opposed to being born into it, is because we have this idea that you adopt these ideas, they're just in the air here. They're just in the air. Your parents just give them to you, just pass them on to you. Even though our government does very little, of any sense of real propagation of those ideas. And to the extent that's true, that is something that is an increasingly global phenomenon as American culture reaches into new areas and becomes increasingly globalized in our
Listen, buddy, I can only get so fucking erect off of your fucking freedom, your fucking freedom boner. All right, I can only get so just vicariously erect.
Yeah, I just want to say I want to give Connor a lot of time.
Yeah.
Here, just because even Bastiat, it was very passionate and I loved it, but we got to give Connor a lot of time here. So
please, as much as you want.
Go off.
You don't have to. I can punch through it.
Okay.
And there's primarily one thing that I want to focus on, but I do want to address some of the things that you said. So don't place any value on the concepts of the nations. So the way that I view nation states are as the regional culmination of kind of a cultural, sociological, linguistic zeitgeist. Any country in the world, especially if you look back in the history of political corporatism, basically political entities that serve an underlying body. This is how states have operated in the past. And on top of that, they do serve essential functions, whether you're talking about guaranteeing food, guaranteeing security, guaranteeing a certain level of social stability, guaranteeing a certain level of social coherence. That way people can there's a psychological idea called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I misapply it all the time. I recommend everybody Google it, but basically, it's how human beings self-actualize. I think states have a role and a responsibility to allow people to self-actualize to the maximum extent possible. So where you see that the United States is just a pragmatic vehicle through which to espouse and implement your values across the globe or whatever, I don't think that this is something that can be done away with once it's, let's say that the United States of America achieves cultural, global, and civic hegemony across the entire planet. I still think that you would need regionalized states in order to perpetuate the value system that allowed that system to function in the first place. I don't think this is, like you said, in the air or in the water. I think it's something that actually has to be culturally, socially, civically reinforced, and that's part of the culture. Which is weird. I know I'm latching on to one thing that you said, but that's why I think the culture needs to be respected. So I do want to get back to nation states. But the thing about some of the later things that you said, one of the things that you mentioned was equal protection of the law. Well, where we see the struggle in modern American societies is where our desire to respect the religions and traditions of people who are different than us come into conflict with our law. So, for instance, female genital mutilation is a cultural practice in some parts of the world. It's viewed as common as circumcision is inside the United States, despite the fact that it scars the clitoris, basically eliminates pleasure for women and all that kind of stuff. And it's a fucking problem. But because it's a social norm in some parts of the society, we've had to criminally penalize people here. When you talk about France, with them treating people differently under the law, the reason why that they've had to do burqa bans and all that kind of stuff is because there's ghettos, cultural ghettos that basically exist where they're not integrated into the rest of society. And when you're talking about, so you're also not just talking about governmental institutions, but you're also talking about social institutions like banks or public places where people are garbed up because it's part of their religion, and that limits their access to services. So what takes priority? Their individual right to practice religion, or the public interest of holding everybody to the same standard, whether legalistically or social expectations? I'm not done yet, so just give me a second if you want to take some notes. So you asked like whether or not we should hold, or whether or not we hold Americans to some kind of like civic or social standard, and is it fair of us to expect foreigners to live up to some like idealized version of what it is to be American? My answer is yes, and we're fucking up by not doing that for our own people. If you gotta go, you gotta go.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
Okay.
It's all right. I can pause there.
Yeah, no worries. Just be prepared to hit play when he gets back.
Oh, I'm rolling, checking second.
There he is. There he is.
I apologize. I've been taking notes, so you don't have to stop. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but hearing some shouting.
No worries.
The cats were apparently the problem. It sounded like somebody's breaking in the house. Sorry.
Well,
okay.
As long as nobody has broken into the house.
No, nobody's breaking the house. I apologize for breaking your flesh.
And if you were in the Eurocuct area of your free trade, free travel agreement, it would just be your expectation to die on camera right now. So thank God you live in the United States, right? So anyways, so just final points. So I think we're massively screwing up by not expecting civic education or civic understanding out of our body politic. I think that when you say that immigrants are coming to the United States of America with some kind of like well-formed definition of what it is to be American, that's intensely interesting to me, because I think if you ask an American what it means to be American, they'd be like, McDonald's, Marvel movies, porn, strip clubs, alcohol, like it literally wouldn't be about some kind of like cohesive civic identity where people care about like principles and values. It'd be about what products you can consume. And while I do love consuming products and then getting excited about new products and then consuming those products and then getting excited about new products, I do think that there should be something more as far as like a principled or virtued core of what it is to be American, or what it is to be Western, or what it is to be free.
Yeah. I'm curious, what does it mean to be American to you?
McDonald's, porn, liquor.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so okay, for me, anyways, it does mean that there's like a certain amount of like principle. There is a principled core that I think does exist in the Constitution that I do care about, and I've really thought long and hard, very hard and very long, what part of this applies to all Americans, right? And like what part of it, if they believe this, they are reinforcing the social and political and cultural core of the United States. And what I boiled it down to was freedom of expression and freedom of speech, like basically the right to conscience. I think that's a bedrock principle as enshrined in the First Amendment. I also think it's incredibly important for any free society to give its citizens the ability to exercise their freedom to conscience. The other one is the right to self-defense, including up to the government. Basically writing it into our foundational principles that if we are being abused by the people who are in charge of us, we have the ability and right to resist that action. I think that's unique to Americanism, because most states would say, no, just shut up and take it. We're the sovereign. You have to take it in the metaphorical pooper. And then limited government. And limited government, I don't mean in a libertarian sense. I mean limited government in the fact that the government is expected to follow the laws that it itself puts in. So when we have a constitution, when we have a judiciary that checks the power of the legislature, when we have the legislature checking the executive branch, we come up with standards, and then we can sway from those standards during times of crisis. But then it's ultimately the responsibility of legislators and judiciaries and government officials and officials in general to beat back the structure into what was agreed upon through a legislative consensus. And I would say that while not completely unique, that is what it's fairly uniquely American.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, I guess I would agree with some of that, except I probably wouldn't attach it even to the Constitution. I would say the Constitution is probably an expression of a lot of that, but I guess to me, what is enduringly American is the desire to shape your own life, to form your own life, to live the kind of life that you see fit insofar as you possibly can. And in that comes a lot of what you've mentioned, the ability not just to defend yourself, of course, which I think most people would appreciate, even if they, whatever their opinions might be on gun control, I think most people would appreciate that, at least in the abstract. Freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom to participate in your government, to have a say over the government that controls you, or not controls you, but has some kind of sway over you, that makes laws and all that. The freedom to shape your own life. And it is hard for me to think of an act more fundamentally self-focused, not selfless, but self-driven, an act that more thoroughly represents a person's determination to shape the course of their own life, to shape their future, to try and build a better life than immigration. I mean, the people who have taken on this kind of act, which is incredibly difficult. I mean, just think about it, for anybody listening, how difficult it is to pick up and move from one city to the next, let alone from one country to the next. I think that these people are taking an act that is, to me, fundamentally American in character, and which requires, I think, a lot of the characteristics that you just described. I mean, in order to do the desire to shape your own life, to better your own life. In fact, the desire and the realization, I suppose, that for you as an individual, those desires are more important than all the collective benefits of staying where you're at, of having a common culture with other people around you, of having a common bond with people who are ethnically and religiously like you. You have made the determination before you even get here, before you're even immersed in our great free land, that your individual benefit is more important for you than all of these, ethnic, cultural, religious tie-downs. And to me, I think that, that combined with the reach of American culture means that people here who come to the United States have already adopted, or have already made a very big decision that seems to me to be fundamentally American in nature.
How do you feel?
This is actually interesting because I hold on, let me just make a note so I don't forget it.
Mm-hmm. And then we can talk about the other stuff. I mean, I have that too, but I figured that would be, since you mentioned,
that's more than enough.
We get immigration and borders focused. This is a big deal because it kind of gets to the crux of the argument of people who are like, I'm not for. What do they say? I'm not against immigration. I'm against illegal immigration. Like, you probably heard that shit a million times. And so the reason why, and this is kind of where I think maybe we're not talking past each other because this is the first time we're talking, but this is where conceptually I think we just completely defer. When you have open borders, limited immigration, all that kind of stuff, where people can do what they want to do with minimal interference from the government. You talked about a lot of sacrifice that people take on as a part of the American experience, and like, what better way could you express your desire to be American than to sacrifice your collective identity and linguistic and ethnic roots on the altar of freedom and self-improvement in order to come to the United States and be a better human being? All right, awesome, fucking base. That's like the coolest shit ever. But when you have the immigration practice that you're talking about, the ability to maintain those ethno-cultural, linguistic, collectivist abilities, what limit is there to that ability to hold on to that group? Why not say, hey, everybody from this country, we can have a much better economic input if we all move to the United States all at the same time. We'll all support each other. We'll be, an economic collective. We'll maintain all of our cultural traditions, and we'll just be a country within a country. And we'll not sacrifice the collective benefits of language, culture, ethnicity, religion, and all that stuff. We won't integrate. We'll just take advantage of the economic stuff. And then here's another thing that I wanted to bring up just before I lose it. Mm-hmm. I appreciate your individualistic projection onto like the prime thing that makes being an American is the ability to self-actualize along a route that you see fit. But for me, like, it's actually the role of the society and the role of the government to enable that communitarian growth. And with a lot of the negative externalities that I would see with like mass immigration or this kind of like free flow, I seriously think that there's a whole bunch of really deep and dark external consequences that would absolutely get in the way of people's ability to self-actualize along routes that they along this route. Drugs being one of them for sure. That's a massive risk. Terrorism being a massive risk. War being a massive risk. And then also, just to bring it back, that collective ethno-linguistic zeitgeist that you would be able to continue if there was no limit to who was coming in when.
I guess I would say, first of all, again, I'm not big on I have no particular desire to protect any cultures. If a culture disappears because people decide they don't want to be a part of it anymore, wait a minute.
Yeah,
Let me just make this point. If a culture disappears because individuals have decided they don't want to participate in it, that's a very different thing than a culture being destroyed by a state or being destroyed by some forceful action. If what you are saying here is that, what about the culture that used to exist in this country before all these people moved away? I mean, look, that's the result of individual choices. Cultures are formed and destroyed all the time. I mean, they survive based on, to some degree, luck. As say other cultures, using the power of violence to destroy them, I suppose. But, what we're talking about here is not that. We're talking about free individuals choosing, to move, to pick up, to live new lives, and all of that. In a situation where a bunch of people come to the United States, for example, and decide, well, we want to continue on with our culture. We don't want to change our culture. Okay, I mean that's something that we've had in the United States before, in some degree. For example, we had a lot of Chinatowns in the late 19th century, early 20th century. As one example of a sort of ethnic enclave that. Some of the people living there just never really learned English. They never really left, or went too far outside of the small ethnic enclave there. They were still enjoying a better life than they had as a result of the fact that they immigrated and stayed. But ultimately, that's really a minority of the American immigrant story. Most people come here and, within a few generations have so thoroughly integrated that they no longer really have any command of the language of the place that they left from. They generally have abandoned that, but that itself is really, and that's pretty universal across groups that have immigrated to the United States, but ultimately that's a matter of free choice, and I think to a degree it's a matter of confidence in American culture that to me sort of underlines a lot of the arguments against immigration. I think a lot of people who are worried about immigration just don't really have any confidence in American culture. They don't view it in the sort of world-beating fashion that I view it. I mean, when I look at the predominance of American media all over the world, the American cultural norms and standards, I mean, how can you look at that and be afraid that that's going to disappear because we have a few more people from some other culture or another culture, even a great many of those people. I mean, it never has yet. There's no reason to imagine in a nation of 330 million people that it would.
All right, so I want to give Connor a chance to say what he wanted to say, and then after Connor, you give your response, uninterrupted. I have a question that I kind of want to raise to both of you.
Yeah.
So go on, Connor.
Whatever y'all want to do.
Yeah, so listen, I appreciate your white pill. Like, I don't know what prescription dose of Zoloft or fucking whatever you're on, but I think I need to up my dosage to whatever yours is. So basically you're right. You're right. I don't have this optimism. I don't have this cultural optimism that liberalism will somehow dominate or mixed economy capitalism will somehow dominate. Maybe I'm too far away from the halls of power. Maybe in the legal field or DC or other places, there's just this unfettered, confidence in the power of the American project to overcome all of its obstacles. And you know what, God bless the people that think that way. I hope they're totally correct. My fears, though, my sincere fears, is that this is really, God. I'm trying not to be rude.
Say whatever you gotta say, man. I won't take it. I saw your video you did where you talked about me and being an adorable, nice hair. So I'll just remember that. If you say something real nasty, go for it.
Okay, there's an important question that backs up there. Are you a natural gas attorney or a petroleum attorney? That's
does it really matter? I mean, all the people who hate me for one are it's natural gas, But
okay,
some of the companies,
right?
but some
natural
of the
gas burns clean, way cleaner than everything else, right?
Well, it's certainly it doesn't burn cleaner than a solar panel, I guess, but it's still I think it's a net good, but many people would disagree, and the kind of people who want to cut my head off for being an oil attorney are not going to be like, oh well, I didn't know it was a natural gas. Oh, that makes you feel better,
Okay, but
I just want to say, Bastiat, Connor, he doesn't really get along with lawyers very well. So Connor, I just want to give a little frame of warning to you. Okay, I know he's a lawyer. All right, I know that, but just let's.
I heard everything you said about how people should hate a guy like me. I totally understand. I get it,
but it's impossible.
Yeah, man. So say what you will, man. I'm
okay. All right.
Down.
So this is what is frustrating to me because the thing about it is I understand the world in macros. I do. Like macroeconomics, macro studies, macro this, macro that. We're living in one of the most like peaceful, productive, healthy, happy, long-lived, economically viable times on the planet. Climate change is an interesting threat, but it's not like we can't figure it out. Like we can probably figure it out technologically. We can kind of figure it out. And on top of that, the kind of optimism that you're bringing to the table is the kind of thing that makes me confident that we can figure it out. That there are people who are out there who are saying like, hey, listen, we got problems, but we can figure it out. And I have confidence in the faith of the structures of the society that we have created that we will ultimately prevail.
Yeah.
Awesome. Maybe I spend too much of my time on Twitter. But the thing about it is what's happening with immigration, in particular, Middle East and North Africa and Central America, is there are real challenges. And it seems like the people who are incredibly optimistic stick their heads in the sand about the challenges. And then it seems like the people who are bigoted and just don't want, brown or black people around them, think that every single time that something bad happens, that like it's the apocalypse when it's not. But at the same time, I'm in the middle between these two people where I'm trying to tell the rose-tinted, happy optimists or whatever that, just opening up the borders is not, going to save you from the potential negative externalities. And I'm also trying to tell the people who are, hey, Middle Eastern and North African people are going to fucking kill us all through Sharia law. I'm also trying to tell them like, hey, probably not. By the third generation, most people integrate. There's still a higher risk of, this, that, the other happening. But at the same time, like, on the whole, it's probably going to be okay. I think you stand a higher chance of getting, killed by a fucking coconut than you do a jihadist terrorist, right? In the United States at this point. But all of that being said, that doesn't change real and fucked up things that happen when we have these cultural clashes. I worked as a law enforcement officer. I found, dog fighting rings. I found animal fighting rings. And to the individual, statistics don't matter. When it comes to jihadist terrorism, you can look at the past decade in Europe since, the mass immigration waves, and you can say, hey, what's a few hundred people in the grand scheme of American or liberal power projection across the world? What is a few hundred people in the grand scheme of this thing? Whereas most people see dead kids in a Berlin market run over by a truck filled with cinder blocks. So that's where I'm saying, like, the problem with me is that, to me, it is not the right of random people across the globe to travel wherever the hell they want and keep whatever cultural traditions they want. And it's also not the responsibility of nations who have no legal, ethical, moral duty to these people whatsoever. Say, yeah, fuck it. The economy is going to do good. And overall, this is the arc of history anyways. So what's a few terrorist attacks to 10% increase in GDP over the next 10 years? And by the way, like this is the thing where it gets like really cold for me. I appreciate the stats. I appreciate the macroeconomics. I appreciate the historical trends and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I think that you're not counting into the fact that this does cause cultural whiplash, where what happens during like the mass immigrant trends is a whole bunch of anti-immigrant sentiment, a whole bunch of people get hurt and killed. Whereas if you have a more stable, standardized, understandable, civically focused, smart immigration system that's understandable by everyone, then you can avoid a bunch of murders and terrorist attacks. So I'll leave it there.
So I think you raised actually, I think the one good argument against immigration.
Yeah, just I am going to So I'm going to let you. Okay, I was going to raise the question. So I know you probably got a lot to say, Bastian, and that's cool. You can respond. I'll let you respond. Yeah, I'll be a little lenient.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I think you raised the well, let me ask you this. So it sounds like you're saying, I'm not sure if you're saying this is your opinion or if this is the opinion of most people. Is it when you say, okay, most people, I'm not sure. It sounded like you were saying most people don't care about all your data, right? I might even concede your data, but most people don't care about that. They care about these individual stories, what we might both agree are exceptions to the rule that generally immigrants follow the law and don't commit crimes and all that. Most people don't care about that, even if counterpoints might acknowledge that you're right on that. Is that what you were saying? Or were you saying, I don't care about that?
It's approximately true, but there's probably some cultural tropes that I care about that you don't.
Okay. Well, just kind of at the big level, I guess what I would say is the one you brought up whiplash at the end, and you brought up violence, and I don't concede the point on violence because in the United States we've had far less of it than they have in Europe, for example, where they've got much more restrictive, arbitrary, and I would say
Why,
especially with
though?
respect to with respect to Muslims and North Africans, very ethnically targeted laws that, for example, ban different types of clothing. Here in the United States, we adhere to equal protection. We don't single these people out for discrimination against the state any more than we do anyone else. And as a result, they have integrated historically well here in the United States, while in Europe, their different approach that has been taken in just about every country in Europe has been comparatively worse. Although, to be clear, most countries in Europe have still been relatively successful on this issue. They've had more problems than we have, which is one reason why I try to go with the American approach. But I think that the point you make is very interesting. You mentioned whiplash, right? Political whiplash. And you are right that there is political whiplash, particularly from the right wing, from large amounts of immigration. And that is the one good argument that I really do not have a retort to, that just there will be right-wing reactionary forces that will react to large amounts of immigration, and that is why you shouldn't do it. Even though I agree with everything else you're saying, Bassi, there are right-wingers who do not care about the data, who do not care, cannot be persuaded, and therefore, if you have all these people in, you will get a reaction that will be bad. And you know what? That's an argument that for now I do not have a counter to. Perhaps there is a way to do it, to have large numbers of immigrants that does not result in that. I think perhaps large numbers of immigrants might not necessarily be what causes that. It might be the chaos that comes with large numbers of immigrants at a border who don't have a process to get in orderly. Perhaps that's what it is. Perhaps it's just the chaos of existing processes, when a lot of people maybe rush a border or something. But that is the one point on immigration that I think I would say, is a problem, is the reaction that happens irrespective of the outcomes, just because there are a lot of people in society who just don't like a lot of immigrants coming in very quickly, even if I could pill them on all the facts. But I also do want to say one thing, and that is I just don't understand kind of the lack of optimism about American culture, because it seems to me that it sort of suggests that there are other cultures that are stronger, that are more capable, that people are more adherent to, and I just, it seems like the history of the American experience is that that's just not true. It hasn't been true for the last 200 years. And while there are occasionally, I suppose, examples around the edges, maybe people will come here to practice their Amish religion in a particularly insular way, those are basically exceptions. And generally speaking, they've always been pretty peaceable. Not just the Amish, I mean, just kind of the insular exceptions. And, most notably, they are the exceptions. So I don't think this is some kind of misplaced fear. I think it's just a recognition that our culture, perhaps unique among all the other cultures of the world, is a culture based not on what you should do, but on what you want to do, what you want as an individual. And that is just uniquely appealing, and that has, created a framework for a country that has, assimilated more immigrants than any other in history. So.
Okay, so I know that you probably have some things you want to respond with, Connor, and that's cool. But something that I kind of want to raise to both of you, because I think Bastiat heard you said that there was like something you couldn't respond to or whatever. But something that I'm a little worried about, and I thought this might happen, and I'm not sure if it's happening, but just in case it is, I want to raise a question to both of you, and I'm just interested in seeing where this goes. So, Bastiat, I would like you to explain to Connor what specifically he would have to do to get you over to his position, like within your principles, within your morals, etc., etc. And then I would like you to do the same for Bastiat, Connor, and I would like to see where that goes. Now, Connor, you can respond with everything you wanted to respond to if you like, but after then, I would really love it if both of you were able to do that, because I'd be interested to see where that goes.
No, I can.
It's not like a
wait.
metaphysical roadblock as
Okay.
far as like, yeah.
So generally speaking, is my position that like all of the benefits of immigration, like the economy, for example, stronger economy, stronger country, stronger America, more freedom in this country and in the world generally, right? Weak America, less freedom here and abroad. Strong America, more freedom, right? So I think that's one of the reasons I support immigration, is I think it makes our country much stronger, and it respects freedom a lot more. If you could demonstrate to me that it makes our country weaker, that it makes us less free, then I would be, I'd be open to restricting that freedom the same way I'm open to restricting, other freedoms. Like, for example, and just to illustrate the logic, I often talk about a really, strong military. I acknowledge that a military is a huge imposition on our freedom. Strong military is one of the things the founding fathers are worried about. But, I believe it is a necessary imposition on our freedom that preserves a greater amount of freedom by preserving us from, the threat of communist China or Putin's Russia or whatever. So if you could demonstrate to me that immigration actually, the kind of immigration I propose would make us less free, and I don't know that's impossible. I mean, I mentioned the reactionaries, that being one thing there, that would, I think, cause me to change my position.
Okay. And then to articulate, and I can respond to that, and I will in a second, but I'll just say what I think would get me to go to Bastiat's position. I think there's like a different position besides globalism and nationalism, which somebody talked to me about recently, which was like internationalism. You keep a core of the nation that has like some levels of like principles, cultural identity, linguistic identity, civic institution and tradition and all that kind of stuff. And I think there's a certain amount of like correlation between some nations that have some level of shared history. I'm not saying that they have to have a shared history. I'm just saying that it helps, right? So if you were talking about like your North American liberal democratic union with easy visas and access and travel and all that kind of stuff, the reason why I would be open to that is because I do think that most nations would retain a core, while there would be an international move of different people to different places, and cultural cross-pollination might ultimately create the something that's greater than the sum of its parts, right? It would retain the individuals while still becoming something bigger than itself. And then that's what I would need to know or feel or believe to move more your way. And then the reason why I'm not coming your way all the way, which I think is going to address the question that you asked of me, does open borders or does open immigration, does it make us more free? A lot of the threats that we have had over the past 2 decades have been the result, not because of some great nationalistic attack, but because of micro attacks. So if you're talking about 9/11, jihadist terrorism in general, what's happened is in response to that, similar to an immune system response, the United States military security forces apparatuses and all that kind of stuff have come up with things like the Patriot Act and also the FISA Accords and terrorism regulation and all that kind of stuff. And that was the result of allowing a small population of people who did have different values than us, but an even smaller population, subset population, that had completely contradictory and violent aims that ultimately engendered a certain response. And so what I would say is that the thing that I've been articulating all along is that with Middle Eastern and North African immigration in particular, if you just let people do whatever the fuck they want, then that's probably going to create some level of cultural schism. That's going to create some level of, increase in terrorist attacks. As a result, there is going to be reactionary violence. There is going to be reactionary politics. So ultimately what would happen is that if you open that up and you have that cultural clash, then what's going to happen is similar to an immune system response. The immune system is going to assume that it's under attack and it's going to clamp down on everything. So that would be my number one argument. Then my second argument would be related to Chinese intellectual property theft in particular. So they have been reverse engineering a decent chunk of our military technology by stealing tech secrets from our companies and then moving it back to China. Now, this is intentional and strategic and all that kind of stuff. But China, to me, is an example, a historical example where liberalism failed. We thought that opening up the economy was going to open up the culture. And in some ways it has. And I would love to eat my words. Like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, China collapses under the pressure of internationalism. It says, you know what, fuck it. We're not going to be like a weird ethnic superior cultural enclave that's going for world domination. As a matter of fact, we want to, basically be peers with everybody. And we want to full-throatedly engage liberal democracy and human rights and all that kind of shit. Awesome. I would love to be proved wrong. But what I think China has proven, at least within the past decade, is that you can have awesome market economics and nefarious political organs that are like tumors on top of those that economic engine. So what happened is, instead of the China economic liberalization destroying the cultural pressure of the CCP, because of the rise of surveillance technology, they have basically been able to affirm their control on society through authoritarian means. So instead of getting a weakened CCP that was ultimately thrown off by the Han Chinese inside the country, we now have a strengthened CCP because they can use the economic force of their country while changing absolutely nothing of their authoritarian bullshit, and then using technology in order to reinforce it. So that would be another fear of mine, just to wrap this idea up. That would be another fear of mine, where mass immigration, let's just say that we had shitloads of people from China come over, and within that midst, there was a whole bunch of Americans. I will teach them all to shoot guns and cook barbecue and all that shit. I will do all the American things with these fucking folks coming in, right? But there will be a small percentage of those folks that are going to still be loyal to China, and as a result, they're going to reaffirm the solid grip of the CCP by spying for them and by basically stealing our IP and sending it back. And that's my fears. I do think we have a rival and a competitor, and I do think that we have an immunosystem response when we do too much too fast. I do have another point, but I'm gonna shut up for now for there.
Okay. Well, look, I don't doubt, I don't deny at all that we have a competitor. I mean, I think one reason, actually a very compelling reason, that we should have more immigration is that our competitor has a population 4 to 5 times our size. Right now, our advantage is to continually run on our technological and economic superiority, but presumably in time, the United States will not be able to maintain predominance or even parity with China if it is going to be a country that is 4 to 5 times the population of the United States. So certainly, the prospect of millions more people coming here to the United States, even if some of them turn out bad, to me seems like a very important thing we should consider from a national security perspective, in anticipation of a decades long competition with China. So I think that, to me, is a very compelling reason to have more people in this country, because, of course, many immigrants, even if you were worried specifically about Chinese spies, if you want to say specifically, which I think this would be a terrible mistake, but if you want to say specifically, look, communist China is such a great threat that we cannot have all these people from China here in the United States, even if you were to shut them out for that reason, which, again, I think would be a terrible mistake, most immigrants would come from most of the other countries in the world anyway. So, and of course, I think that most people in China, like most people everywhere in the world, do not like to be told what to do by an oppressive authoritarian government. And that, while you're perhaps right, there would be people, spies, who try and take advantage of our system. I mean, that is, I do not think for a moment that it is our immigration system here in the United States, with all its strange loopholes and absurdities and long processes. I don't think the Chinese Communist Party is waiting 10 to 15 years to get people placed in the United States. I think they're getting them in through clandestine means anyway. So I do not believe the prospect of legal immigration is what's keeping these folks out. I also, I think it is a little strange, although this seems perhaps to be another point, the idea that liberalism has failed with respect to China. I mean, it's worth noting that China is, the oldest and perhaps, alongside our own, the most glorious culture in the world. I mean, 5,000 years of history, 1.5 billion people, and they've been reforming since, at least they were at one point reforming in a positive direction since 1980 or so. That's a big thing to change overnight, and I wouldn't count China out just yet in terms of a country that, has had now 40 years of increasing prosperity, the growth of a new middle class that in time will demand more of a say over its own life. Perhaps Xi Jinping will be the first man to, the first leader in history to perfect a perfect dictatorship of some kind, but I do not think it is such a clear bet to say that is just kind of the fate of the people of China. And in any event, I do not think most of them, if they wanted to leave their own country, would want to leave to replicate what it is they have to any greater degree, have in China under Xi Jinping, that is, to any greater degree than New Yorkers come to Florida and want to suddenly replicate what they left in New York. fact, I think it would be much more so, given how much more real and true the
I was about to say that's a bad example.
It's not a bad example. They come here, they leave. It's not a bad example. They come here, they leave high taxes. Yeah, maybe they'll say occasionally, "Oh, things in our place were better," but at the end of the day, they're leaving to get away from things, and they're focused on the exceptions to the rule, just like anybody else is when they complain about something or another. And so I think it's worth noting that. But beyond that,
New Yorkers in Florida is not a good example.
It is a good example. It is a good example. What have they changed exactly? The state has continued to get redder and more Republican the more people have come here. The state used to be competitive when it was smaller. So this idea that they've changed the values here, if anything, they've doubled down. What they say is clearly very different than how they vote. So I think it's actually a pretty solid example. But beyond that, the bigger point, like that's a meme. That's a meme. People are moving here and leaving that state. That state is dying because ultimately people don't like the way it's run. They come here because they like the way it's run. So, whatever they may complain about, because people like to complain more than they like to praise, right? I mean, how many of us sit around just, jerking off saying, "Oh, America's great for all these reasons, guys. Okay, stream over." Nobody cares about this stuff. It's more fun to complain.
Well, listen, I mean, you've pretty much given me like a permanent freedom erection this entire stream. So, like, I mean, I appreciate it because, like, honestly, I was feeling very flaccid about American freedom and the prospects of like liberalism in the modern era. But that's probably my fault for who I associate with.
It's worth just Twitter's a pretty depressing place. It's just worth thinking, what is the more compelling model? What is the more compelling alternative?
Yeah. Actually, I want to address that. I want to address that very specifically because I think you asked me like, how do we handle like reactionary anti-immigrant sentiment when it comes to like freedom of movement or mass immigration in general or whatever. Yeah. So the reason why I like to unfortunately this is like a fascist idea, but it's also a fairly common like political idea, which is like political corporatism, conceptualizing the state as like a body, and then evaluating its health, and then evaluating for its health in certain ways, and identifying problems and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, it leads to like pretty quick slaughters of like dissidents and all that kind of stuff. But that aside. The immunoresponse in particular, I think the analogy actually fits fairly perfectly for the way that the human body can misidentify pathogens, attack them, and then how it can be incorporated in the future. Like, so for instance, like our gut bacteria is made made up of our guts, our breakdown of like food and all that kind of stuff is primarily done by bacteria. It's not even done by the digestive system. It's actually like foreign living creatures living inside of us, but they're viewed as like a synthesis of the human body in order to make things work. When it comes to misidentifying pathogens or something like that, it would be as if like you're getting a shock of a new bacteria or a new virus into the immune system, and as a result, your body clamps down. But that doesn't mean that thing can't be incorporated into something positive. And I know I'm going on like a really awful analogy here, but what I'm saying is if you wanted to get the body used to something, then you introduce a small amount of it over a long period of time in order to develop a certain level of amicable response. You don't overwhelm the system instantaneously. And I do think that there's a way to dial that in immigration-wise, where you do have people from different regions of the world who are selected whether or not they're positive contributors to society or negative contributors to society. And as a result, you basically make those selections based off of what you think it is. You pick a certain amount of number of people to allow in at a certain time. And as a result, you minimize the inflammation in this analogy. That way the body is able to incorporate it into something positive. And so that's where I'm not like a groiper. Like, I'm not like an immigrant freeze person. And you were asking me earlier, like, oh, well, because of some Pew Research polls, are all Palestinians fucked because like 70% of them support suicide bombing? No, of course not. But the people who do come, let's use like Gaza or the West Bank, where there is like 70% support for suicide bombing or something like that, I would want part of their immigration process to be like, what do you do now? What do you want to do? What are your virtues? What are your values? What are your aspirations? Where do you want to be? What's your history like? Like all that kind of stuff. Coordinate with local law enforcement in order to figure out whether or not that person's lying. Coordinate with that person's social media to see whether or not that person's lying. And if they're not, and you think that they would be a good fit, then fuck yeah, come on. And, like I said, inside every young Vietnamese person, there's an American waiting to come out. But if you find that person who's like, nah, fuck you, United States is the devil, suicide bombing is okay, fuck Israelis, fuck Jews, fuck Christians, fuck everybody else. Islam will reign supreme. may, the Ayatollah rain holy fire down on the Jews or whatever, then fuck that person. No, they're not coming into the fucking country. And that's kind of where like the criteria, the reason why I'm so uncomfortable with like mass immigration or whatever is because if you have a border check and this person hasn't committed a crime and you don't take time to like evaluate their social media history or their ideology or who they are or whatever, then that second person gets in. And no offense, but fuck that second person.
I just, out of curiosity, like, you seem to concede earlier the point that I made that, like, immigrants have way less likelihood of doing all this stuff compared to native-born Americans, right? I mean, maybe you dispute that. And
I did. As a matter of fact, that was something that I wanted to bring. No, yeah. Okay, so this is where I don't dispute the stat.
Yeah.
But I think the stat is obvious. Like, of course.
Okay, so
if you have 1% of the... Hold on. Okay. I want to explain this because I feel like it needs to be contextualized. If you have 1% of the population that's being added to the population, they're worried about assimilation, they're worried about hate crimes, they're worried about not integrating, then of course 95% of them are going to fly low and try not to get their ass kicked. And when you have a bunch of lackadaisical, no offense Americans, uneducated, douchey, shitty Walmartian assholes who take for granted the freedoms and liberties and everything that we have in this country, and they don't give a shit about anything, yeah, they're going to be bigger fucking assholes than the people who are moving here with like a certain idealistic view of the country. Yeah. So that's where that context is important.
So, I mean, just to be clear, we're talking about like 20% of the population of this country is born in another country. Like, this is a huge part of the population.
How is that not enough?
Like, wait. First of all, it doesn't fucking matter if it's 80% of the population of the country because these groups are fucking irrelevant compared to individual rights. And if you cannot demonstrate some kind of serious harm to the individual, the group is such a secondary, abstract construct to say that yes, based on the group, we will restrict the freedom of the individual. That is so at odds with everything that I think is core to the American project. Say this arbitrary defined group. We're going to discriminate against them because they happen to be born on the wrong side of the imaginary line that restricts what government can cross here and what kind of laws operate on here or another. It's sort of frustrating it's sort of frustrating, admittedly, that like we agree, right, that these people are committing less crime, including terrorism, including, female genital mutilation, which was always illegal in this country, all the rest of that, And yet, basically, we agree that the big problem is the snapback, from other people, right? I mean, and if you don't concede that that's a problem, if you've got other problems, right, we can talk about those, but we at least agree that that's a problem. And yet, I recognize that's a problem. All right, that right wing snapback is a potential risk. And that really is the only problem I see any kind of empirical basis to say, that's a problem. That could happen. And yet, I mean, it seems like, if we want to just argue, hey, we need to have keyhole solutions that don't drive people into voting, voting for absurd reasons against realities we both recognize. It doesn't matter, right? I get what you're saying. That if you're saying that, hey, look, all these different people, they're fine, Bastiat, but at the end of the day, these voters are dumb. These, as you called them, Walmartians, which is a term I'll have to use sometime. These Walmartians you can't persuade them. Okay, they hear a story about cutting up somebody's clitoris, and they just go crazy, and they vote against their own interests, which I concede you're right about, Bastiat. I get that, but it sounds like it's not just that, right? It sounds like you're like, you're like, look, these people on the other side of the line, their rights are just secondary, right? And I just don't concede that at all. The idea that the fact that I was lucky enough to be born here, like, I'll make a pragmatic compromise to max out, whatever it is I'm trying to achieve. But here in this little Twitch space where we can argue as if we don't have to worry about pragmatic compromises, where we have the luxury of talking about rights and good and bad and evil and all that, I just do not understand how you can say, well, the rights of the individual who is born on this side of the line, well, they are so great, in fact, that we acknowledge they're likelier to commit crimes, and yet we will do nothing to control them. We will not go through their social media. That would be very authoritarian. We will not go through and question their parents as to whether they are ready to have children. We're not going to do anything like that because that would be unjust, authoritarian. These are Americans. They have rights. But these other people on the other side of the fucking line, these other people from the rest of the world, those people need to be controlled. And frankly, if some of them are repressed, if some of those good people are screened out, well, God damn it doesn't fucking matter because better that we catch 10 innocent people than let one guilty guy go. You know, when it comes to immigration, everything's flipped on its head. And if you want to talk about pragmatic stuff, I get it. I get that I got to make a lot of compromises here if I want to have any of this stuff possible in the political world. But if we're just talking you and me, I mean, I just don't understand how you can say that in the abstract, the rights of one are more important than the rights of another.
I just got to say, your passion is so fucking awesome. Connor, respond.
I'll
I love
explain
it
it
so much.
Yeah, I'll explain it. So we are jumping between like ideal and pragmatic. So I'll try to give you something to actually sink your teeth into. And there is a point that you said earlier that I absolutely have to address, because I do think it's an interesting part of where our culture is right now. But to address the first part, why do people over this arbitrary line not matter as much, right? So for me, what's interesting is you brought up a whole bunch of things that I can't object with. You're like, oh, because they were born in a different country, they speak a different language, blah, blah, blah. They matter less. No, that's not why they matter less. And that's not even why I care whether or not they can come here. It's purely ideological discrimination. It all has to do with the ideas that are in somebody's head. If somebody has an ideology that I see as parallel to mine, then they're welcome to integrate into my society, because ultimately it's not going to be a problem. But if somebody has an ideology that's contrary to mine, whether if it's a theocracy, support for suicide bombing, support for FGM, support for a bunch of other stuff, then yeah, I absolutely reserve the right to discriminate against those people when they're trying to gain access to the world's greatest empire on the planet, 100%. And this is the other thing that, like, it's really bugging to me, because I'm a fucking millennial, so I get it. Like, I'm old as fucking dirt. I'm like 1,000 years old to all you fucking Zoomer babies. But at the same time, what happened, because of basically people having large access to an increasingly globalized society, was we had 2 fucking jetliners hijacked, flown into the sides of buildings, billions of dollars of damage, 3,000 people killed in a single day. And then on top of that, if you're not interested in that, you don't care about that, you just say, we can take one of those every decade because it's 3,000 people, a few $1 billion worth of damage compared to the overall economy. Who gives a fuck? If you're willing to take that hit, then you also have to include the reactionary Walmartians baying for blood for 2 decades in the wake of that, and basically launching counteroffensives into other parts of the world in order to kill people who are ideologically aligned with that, and all of the collateral damage that causes, because that's another few $1 billion worth of damage, and I believe a few 100,000 people killed in those conflicts. So no, these things are not small potatoes. They absolutely are consequential. I understand that macroeconomically or macro policy or macro immigration or whatever, we can just say, fuck it, few 100,000 people, who gives a shit? But this matters to the people who are in those countries, and it matters to the people who are here, and it matters to fucking boomers like me, who when I was 13 got to watch fucking thousands of people commit suicide by jumping out of fucking burning buildings. And to bring it back, I know that's inflammatory. Give me 1 second. One of the things that you said that was like the root of our greatness that I fundamentally disagree with it, because like basically here's my fucking tradcon right-wing fucking take. I don't think that doing what you want is what makes America great. That's what makes America appealing. It's what makes it sexy. It's what makes good TV shows, and it's what gets people to do drugs and buy sports cars and enjoy liquor and all that kind of shit. But I think that has fuck all to do with what makes America great. And I think that basically abandoning what we should do versus what we want is a very real cultural problem in the modern era, because people talk about what you should do, and then a bunch of Americans, because they have fucking daddy complexes, they go, don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me that I should brush my teeth or go to bed on time or lift weights or eat good food. Don't tell me that, I shouldn't do cocaine at all hours of the fucking night and bang hookers. Don't tell me what to do, daddy government or my actual dad. Fuck you. I'm going to doom scroll on Twitter for 18 hours a day, and then I'm going to wonder why my mental health is dog shit. And this is the fucking problem, okay? Is that, like, I don't identify as what you want as what makes America great. As a matter of fact, if you ask what makes America great, it's oftentimes people acting within the aspirational idealistic of what you should do. Whether it's acting in some kind of communitarian good or looking after their neighbor or creating some kind of cool technology, or I forget the guy who like gave away the polio virus for vaccine for free. It's a whole bunch of people acting in communitarian goods that we at least tell ourselves are the reason why we're great. But then I feel like we fall back on this fucking nihilist consumerist bullshit that I think is fucking evil. And like, I don't know if you're religious or not. I think I like vaguely remember that you're religious. A lot of Americans don't have a religious core. They don't have a principled core. So when you kind of tell them that, like, you know, American society is like, I don't know, fucking vodka commercials and fucking Marvel Avengers, they don't know what the fuck to do with themselves. And that's how they become Walmartians in the first place. So I know that was a lot of info, but I'll yield to that.
I get it. It's surprising, like, to just be so, like, black-pilled about your own country, and yet also, you know, about the prospect. First of all, just to get the 9/11 thing out of the way. 9/11 thing, you know, the passports, or the people getting into the country. I mean, the non-Saudi passports were forged, and the Saudi passports were the result of processes ultimately the United States government shouldn't have trusted with respect to trusting the security of Saudi Arabia. So in some kind of future, the Saudi government let a lot of shoddy passports through. Their security was not good. So presumably, you know, we in evaluating people who come here, we would at least make distinctions as to whether we trust the papers that come from this country or that country or whatever. To be clear, I'm not saying like no controls. I'm saying that once you get through those very basic controls, you don't get to say, well, you know, too many people. All right, it's closed. Doesn't matter how good you are. It's just we got too many people. You know, we're cutting this off at this arbitrary line or something. But
I have a question though.
But let me get to, I guess, the bigger point, because my point there was just say that I don't think 9/11 was the result of like a safe and legal immigration. I think it was ultimately the result of people who, you know, I mean, those people violated the rules and lied to everybody and passed background checks and all that, and they would have got in, I think, under any system as a result of that. But I mean, if you're talking about that, I mean, you know, you can't really. All this system is doing is stopping good actors. It's not stopping bad actors. I mean, clearly, 9/11 is a great example of that, in fact. But beyond that, I think the bigger point, and of course, you made the whiplash point, right? And again, I concede that the whiplash point is something real, and so in designing policy, we have to account for that, right? But at this point, I guess I'm talking about idealism here, because I'll concede we have to deal with the whiplash Walmartians and all that. You know, when it comes to design policy, you got to figure out, you know, how close can I get to it without you get my point on that. But I just have to say, I just don't understand the weird, to me, weird black pill view of American culture that on the one hand seems to animate a lack of pride, a lack of faith in American culture, and yet simultaneously seems to animate a sense of defensiveness, like we are at risk of losing this worthless and broken culture to these people from abroad. It seems like, if anything, an infusion of very religious, traditional rights, traditional values types of people would be a boon to the kind of dying culture you seem to describe here. I mean, combining the riches of the United States with the traditional cultures of people around the world, most of whom do not engage in strange genital mutilation and honor killings and all the rest of it, but who ultimately are very culturally conservative, very religiously conservative. I mean, we were talking at length about people from North America and or not North America, North Africa and the Middle East earlier, and I mean, prior to the events of 2001 and the Walmartian whiplash, Muslims voted reliably for Republicans in every election that people were tracking. So these are very conservative people who voted for the very conservative party before it stopped giving them nearly any respect at all. So I think it is very fair to say that, I mean, the kind of bleak outlook you describe seems like it would benefit from an infusion of people who have not been, I guess, tainted by American culture in some way, or at least who have not been tainted so thoroughly by American culture.
So Connor, you had a question. Let you ask that question.
Nah, it's no. I have counterpoints.
That is your name. Go for it.
That is my name. Finger guns. All right. So this is the frustration for me with one of the things that you said is got in under any system. Now, security systems don't. It's not all kabuki theater. A decent amount of it is, but it's not completely ineffectual. If not, we wouldn't have any kind of security apparatus whatsoever. And on top of that, I'm pretty sure if we talk to like intelligence professionals, counterterrorism professionals, it's not solely them trying to preserve their job that animates their defense of the work that they do every day. It's probably because they actually see bad people doing bad shit, and as a result, they get to take some level of action. another thing that you said, which I hope is hyperbole, all the system is doing is stopping good actors. It's not stopping bad actors. That's like another, like, if I was, I know you're not like a traditional internet leftist or whatever, but this is the kind of mentality that I would expect to hear from, like, I don't know, like a ACAB, ANCOM, where they're like, the cops don't do anything except for fuck with poor people. They actually don't protect anybody ever. Like that's like a weird hyperbolic statement.
I think it's more like I'm trying to say the gun laws don't. It's like when people say, all the gun laws do is prevent bad people or good people from getting guns. I mean it more like that. I mean, I think that's.
But see,
I think that's basically true.
I'm an interesting gun guy though. So from the gun perspective or whatever, no, it's not true. Gun control does work. It does decrease homicide by around like 30 to 40%. If you compare us to like European or Brit bonger cucked nations or whatever, we have about 30% less homicide than they do. We have 30% to 50% more homicide than they do. But at the same time, my argument around there is around a utilitarian calculus about the balance of like freedom and security. It's not a complete ignorance to the variable of guns on violence. So in the same way, I would say that our security apparati, they don't just affect good people. No, I'm pretty sure they catch like a decent amount of fucking evil motherfuckers on the planet, or else we wouldn't do any of this shit anyways. Then the comment about whiplash, like, listen, I know I'm reminded of the late great Norm Macdonald, who has some chud takes. One of the jokes that he said that got him canceled and ultimately unhireable was that he said, "Oh, a jihadist terrorist set off a nuke in downtown Manhattan, killing millions of people. I'm really worried about the Islamophobia." And that's like the whole point of the joke is that like people are so concerned about the fucking whiplash that they're fucking hitting themselves with like a flagellant whip of like white guilt and like fucking anti-colonial fucking sentiment the second a fucking bomb goes off in the western fucking city. So it's really fucking weird that we can't just address the fucking negative externalities that come with fucking terrorism and immigration and the correlation with jihadist terrorism. It's just a fucking thing. So that's a weird thing. And then about the weird black pill about the United States. Yeah, sure. Maybe we could benefit from an infusion of new blood, because basically all I hear is all the fucking negatives about my own country. And I do think that I have some reasons to be negative about my own country. I think that we sold ourselves a romantic vision of like, we were the people who tried to save the Jews in World War II, and we destroyed fascism, and we did this and we did that, and we saved the Kuwaitis, and we did all this kind of shit. And when you actually look back on history, we were doing fucking dirt. We were doing some evil fucking shit in order to make stuff happen. So yeah, liberal democracy is based. Yeah, human rights is based. But if you look at the actions of our government in foreign fucking theaters, it's more about the money than it is about human rights. It's more about trade than it is about anything else as far as a motivating factor. So while I do think that these goals are not necessarily like opposing, I do think that it's interesting to learn that we're promoting like liberty and democracy and freedom of conscience by fucking torturing and assassinating and murdering people. Like it's an interesting paradox.
Yeah, it is an interesting paradox. I mean, look at all the we fried at least 1 million Germans, probably a million, probably more than 1 million Germans, and an equal number of people in Japan in the course of World War II. But at the same time, what else can you do when you have a fascist regime that's trying to destroy you and enslave the world? I mean, you have to destroy these factories that have been located in the middle of cities, and there's no other way to do it, unfortunately. Hold on, and I guess the point I'm trying to make here is
just one person at a time.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you want to say something, Connor. I know you want to say something.
Can I interject? Because it's important.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, you can interject. Sure.
Okay, Bastia, I love your rants, and I love your freedom, and I love your freedom boner. I really do. Like, seriously, I'm getting like a freedom erection. But at the same time, that might have been true. But if you look at our actions since 1950, whether it's like, covert operations in petroleum or drug-heavy areas, or if you look at even our interaction with Iraq, which is relevant because we just got done with it, we are playing both sides a decent chunk of the time. Yeah. We are permitting morally abhorrent things by our peers and our allies in order to get stuff done. Yeah. And so this is where the black pill comes in. It's because I served in the military. I love the United States. I wanted to succeed. But at the same time, I basically have to know that I served as a part of a military that sold weapons of mass destruction to the country that I invaded for weapons of mass destruction. So like that's the kind of like moral, while I agree with you that America is fucking based and liberal democracy is based or whatever, we have to reckon with the fucked up shit that we've done. Yeah. But this is where, for me, it's kind of like, it almost feels like a fucking naivete where we just assume that other people want what we have. They want to be here. They want to participate. They want everything.
Well, I mean, Connor, we know they want to be here because they're willing to face clubs and armed thugs to get here. I mean, the people who are immigrating here certainly want to be here. And we know that because of the great risk they're willing to... Like, I don't understand the point you just made. All the other stuff that you said about, the lefty stuff about it. America is, has done all these dark things all over the world. I get that. And ultimately, perhaps I brush that aside too simply by just saying, look, on balance, the world that America has made is far better than any other world you could possibly reasonably imagine having happened if it had been otherwise. All right? Maybe that's too cavalier. Maybe that is not respectful enough. Maybe that is too idealistic, whatever. But the point you just made, tying that back to immigration, say, we don't even know that all these people want to be here. Look, all I'm saying is give them the option. Don't beat them in the head if they should try. Don't club them. Don't stop them if they should want to try. After they show up and they do the review and you go over their Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of it, don't stop them. That's all I'm saying. At the end of the day, it's the whole core of the argument. Don't stop them. Let them choose.
What's the upper limit of this though? That's actually like
the upper limit is 1 billion Americans. That's it. As many as we can get, because I really do not believe there's any number that you could prove would be a problem. And then we know, by the way, that's not going to happen because all the Gallup research has ever been done in terms of polling people around the world as to when they would, if they could, right? If everything was in place, if they could come here, would they? Well, about 150 to 200 million apparently would. But even then, that would not be something they could do overnight. They'd have to get the resources to do it. It would be very difficult to get 200 chartered flights, 200 million chartered flights in a year and all the rest of it. Right? It's a very difficult thing to do. But, we know there's an upper limit to that in terms of likelihood, but frankly, I don't think there is any upper limit. This country started in 1776 as less than 3 million people huddled on the edge of a not yet explored continent, and is today 330 million people spread across North America. That kind of growth, frankly, to imagine 330 million going to 1 billion or more compared to what we started with and what we've done over the last 250 years is frankly conservative by comparison. We have exploded unlike any other country in the world, and we've been just fine for it. We've been better for it.
But this is interesting to me though for a variety of reasons, and one of them being that so if we look at the, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the mixed economy, capitalist, liberal, human rights coalition of countries or whatever, or even if you look at America as a continent, I think America as a continent, we're already at 1 billion. Then if you add in, I think if you look at China, they've been able to squeeze 1.2 billion. They do have a demographic issue, by the way, as far as continued growth. They actually have one of the lowest birth rates on the planet. So I'm actually not too worried about Chinese population. And one of the weird things about this entire conversation that's just kind of in the backdrop for me is you're talking about American growth because of American power. Awesome. Cool, I guess. Talking about 1 billion Americans. All right. I mean, we can probably accommodate it on the continent, but this is all within the backdrop of a 50% decrease of birth rates planet-wide within the past 15 years. And this is all happening within the background of Western developed nations or whatever settling between 1.5 and 3 births per, I forget what the demographic replacement rate, but it's supposed to be 2.15. We're at 1.5 to 3. I think the United States in particular is at 1.85, and the only reason why we have a sustainable population is because of immigration. And then this is all in the backdrop of increasing standards of living where, you as a natural gas attorney are responsible for providing the energy necessary for the future without destroying the fucking planet. And you're asking me where these black pills are coming from. Some of the black pills are coming from fucking waking up, signing into fucking Twitter, and seeing a bunch of 17-year-old American fucking leftist non-binary kids who are about to fucking kill themselves because they think that the world's gonna end in fucking 12 years. So that's my thing is, I don't know where this fucking white pill is coming from. You think that we can have like mass immigration? You think that we can integrate all these people into the country? We can somehow stabilize our social civic institutions within the next century in order to accommodate 1 billion people. We can create like transnational unions in order to solidify our economic growth. We can compete with China as a peer, and then somehow we can do all of this within the backdrop of like technological revolution that changes energy and material consumption in such a way that we somehow don't destroy the planet, and we can all do this within the next 70 years. Like, again, what is your fucking dosage for fucking like anti-anxiety meds? Because I'm pretty sure I need to match it.
All right,
So
let's-
before
this is a
before
super
Bastia
good
answers-
point. This is really good. All right, this is really
No.
good.
You're gonna get to say. You're gonna get to say everything. Okay. I want you to say that, and then I want to outro because we're reaching about 2 hours.
Okay.
We're at like an hour 45. So I want to outro. It's been so good. I've been loving the fuck out of this. So yeah, Bastia, you respond to Connor. Then I will let Connor give an outro, and then Bastia, you can also give an outro.
Okay.
Go.
Okay. Look, I mean, to quote Dave Chappelle from his recent special, The Closer.
Uh-oh.
Oh no,
Twitter.
You're on Twitch.
Twitter,
You're on Twitch. Be
yeah.
careful.
Twitter is not a real place. All right, Twitter is not a real place. And we're talking about Twitter here. All right, a bunch of 17-year-old lefty lunatics screaming about this, that, and the other. Look, Twitter is a fucking mental health asylum, an open sewer of all the insane, the lunatics. The lumpen proletariat who dream themselves as being the vanguard of some future revolution instead of the grist that would be ground up on day one if there ever were such a revolution. All of these people are, for the most part, they're mostly irrelevant lunatics. And Twitter is useful as a place for growing your platform. It is not useful as a place for getting the pulse of what society thinks in any real way. And I think most people on Twitter, including the insane 17-year-olds you mentioned, would probably agree with that if you really pressed them on the issue. I'm on Twitter too. I use it as a platform. I would not use it. I don't know why anybody else is on Twitter except for the purpose of growing a platform that they hope to monetize at some point. Otherwise, I do not understand it because it is a depressing place that does not represent the views of the real world. But let's go past that though. Where is the white pill? Right? You mentioned population growth. First of all, it is true that really at some point the whole world will, assuming everybody's living standards continue to improve, the whole world will have a lower population growth. It'll probably flatline. I think the UN predicts it'll flatline around 2100 at about 10 billion people or so. When Africa's population growth, which right now is the most explosive in the world, as that continent continues to develop and improve, that'll start to slow down, and we'll probably flatline around 10 billion people, and then it perhaps start to go down. So there is a sort of ticking clock in the sense of how long we can take advantage of this kind of, there's a large number of people from other parts of the world. Maybe we'll never even get to that point. Who knows? But 10 billion people. Who knows? But so you are right that population growth will not continue forever based on current estimates. That seems, though, all the more reason why, while there's a lot of people who want to come here, we should take advantage of that while we can, so that once we get to this future, we're in a stronger relative position. But beyond that, I think you raise an interesting point. Where does white pill come from? How do you think we can do this, that, and the other in the midst of social division, existential threat, this competition with this rising power? Because we've already done it, man. That was the story of the 20th century that opened with the two cataclysmic world wars against the strongest country in the world at that time, militarily at least, Germany. And then, the second half that was spent in a competition with a rising power in the midst of unprecedented, and I would say still quite unsurpassed social division here in the United States. A lot of what we have now, I think, compared to the Civil Rights era, compared to the Vietnam War protests, compared to the bombings and terrorism of the 1970s, which, while not as deadly as, say, 9/11, was much more frequent and common, routine aircraft hijackings, things like that. The resignation of a president. These were very divisive times. The United States, in the middle of this period, Civil War. Okay, true. The Civil War is worse than that. Somebody in my chat mentioned the Civil War, but so we've done some. The midst of the Civil War, actually, I'm glad they mentioned that, because during the Civil War, now of course the South was annihilated, but the northern states, in the midst of this cataclysmic war, nevertheless still managed to grow their economy. They were bigger and stronger, even despite the fact that the southern states had been annihilated. the United States has dealt with cataclysmic challenges, very difficult challenges in the past, and because of its, serious, I think, ability to improve upon itself, to learn from lessons, however painful that learning may be, it emerged at the end of the 20th century triumphant over every single one of its rivals, its serious rivals in the 20th century, and it did so stronger than ever in the midst of an information revolution, energy revolution for the time. And I see no reason to imagine that, things have changed so much now that we're even richer and stronger than before that we can't do that again, with respect to climate change, global warming, and I think comparatively smaller problems of our time. So I think it's very reasonable looking at what America did in the 20th century, but in the 19th century, I mean, its whole history, right up to planting the flag on the moon, is just a history of meeting massive challenges and succeeding in the face of them. So.
All right, so Connor, if you want to respond to anything Bastiat said, you can, but do it. Just bear in mind that after you respond to him, you are outroing. And then Bastiat, if you want to respond to anything Connor says here, you can do that, but just bear in mind that you are also outroing if you do so. So,
okay,
go on, Connor.
Yeah, so done it before, do it again. It's actually really interesting. A lot of people in the lineup to the debate, they were like, "Oh, well, what are Bastiat and Connor even going to fight about? They're practically the same fucking person politically." I hope we demonstrated that's not fucking true. I think we have some serious ideological contention, and I do try to. I do have like a more fatalistic worldview. I am more negative, but at the same time, I think that there's something valiant in the fight. Do it before we'll do it again, right? That's awesome, and I wish I had your optimism, but I don't. My mentality is more, it doesn't matter, because the principles and virtues and character that has carried us thus far is the fact that we will face these challenges and we will fight to the bitter end, regardless of like win, lose, or draw. So I don't care if America is the preeminent world power. I don't care if liberal democracy dominates the globe, but I know what side I'm going to fight on, which is for liberal democracy and, America to be a preeminent world hegemon. All of our sins included in the calculus that I've made. So the only thing that I would say, or the caution, is pride goes before the fall. Part of the reason why I'm bringing up these like really contentious issues, I really do respect your intellect. I appreciate you coming after these things the way that you did, because they've even challenged my own negativity and pessimism by participating in Twitch.tv and Twitter for so long. It's challenged my negativity of like, oh, I just presumed that the world was going to, we were going to have like 100 million dead people from global warming, and we all might as well kill ourselves now because it's going to be 110 degrees in Florida. So we might as well all just walk into our backyards and commit seppuku right now. Like that's what I assumed. But since you're so hopeful about it, I'm going to hold off on that. And then I'm hopeful and anxious, and I hope for all of my bitches and gripes and complaints and criticisms and all that kind of stuff, I hope you're right. I don't want to be right about my criticisms. I don't want to be right about my fears of terrorism or security issues or immigration or people from different countries with like different languages and cultures. I don't want to be right about global warming. I don't want to be right about any of these things. So as much as I bring these up, it's because I want these ideas to be battled in a coherent and intelligent way that can actually offer some hope to the younger generation, so they don't feel like bitching and complaining and crying and dying. Instead, they feel like getting into the trenches and starting to push for positive things themselves. And then finally, if you liked my comparative negativity, cynicism, swear words, pessimism and all that kind of stuff, my name is Connor. I run a YouTube channel named Counterpoints. I'm a Marine veteran and a law enforcement veteran. I like to think that I'm a science fiction, political, and philosophy nerd. Layman is one of my philosophical, political boys. So if you like him, then you'll like all the shit that I say. And then this guy, I called him an asshole earlier in the week. Oh, no, I didn't even call him an asshole. I said that that I hated his position. But natural gas is more based than petroleum, and I really did enjoy this conversation. So anybody who's in my community but not in either one of theirs, please follow and sub theirs.
I would also like to, as great as that was, Connor. Mm-hmm. On my end, you were not pointing at Bastiat. You were pointing to a voidless black hole. So that's okay. I forgive you. I forgive you. Bastiat, go on.
Well, I will only say, that with respect to some of the other issues, look, foreign involvement, it is important to be honest with ourselves about the full extent of America's involvement in the world, and it has often been negative. It is only my contention at the end of the day that it is better for America to be engaged than not. Not that America is always good when it is engaged, or that every act that America has been involved with is honorable or decent. It's just to say that, on balance, America is a force for good in the world. So another point I would say is that people, in this particular sphere here, Twitch and Twitter, people on the left, I think, often have a lot of good critiques, and critiques are good. I think they often, though, do not really have much in the way of prescriptive solutions, and I think the end result can oftentimes be a lot of depression, and it doesn't really go anywhere. So I would encourage people to be, to consume that kind of content, within reason, and I suppose keep that point of view in mind. Don't let it depress you. So back to this issue. I think the past, with respect to the United States, really is illustrative of the fact that we have dealt with large-scale immigration in the past and benefited from it massively. Every time we've allowed ourselves to let in people from all over the world. And I think that it is an important thing to remember that. I think it's also important to remember that this country has dealt with great challenges in the past, and it will continue to deal with great challenges, and it will nevertheless be able to thrive and prosper. Indeed, it always has. And I think it's worth remembering that, if you're going to take the Doomer argument, that is to me, a pretty ahistorical argument, especially when you square up the problems that we've got today with the problems we've had in the past. I mean, if we think, for example, about, screaming people with pink hair and purple hair, all that kind of crowd, and, we compare them to the folks in the past who, tried to secede from the Union, or in the 1960s, the virulent, white citizens council types of people out there screaming that race mixing is communism, or the, I mentioned a lot of left-wing terrorism in the 1970s. The United States has dealt with some pretty sticky situations in the past and has come out ahead just about every time. And I think it is fair to say that it is not a good idea to bet against America, the power of the American system, and the ability of the American people to thrive under many conditions. I mean, climate change, for example, seems like one such situation that the United States will probably have to deal with respect to immigration, because climate change, while it'll be a challenge for America, it's not going to lead to the deaths of a whole lot of people here compared to, the potential suffering in other parts of the world that are likely to be more severely impacted by climate change. We have the resources to deal with a lot of these problems, and they don't. So we may very well have a lot of climate refugees, and we may very well see, whether America rises to the challenge of bringing these people in and then is ready to accept the benefit, really, of these people working and thriving and prospering here. So I think it is important to remember that these are issues that are not just going to remain abstract if people are right about the possibility of climate change. But whatever may happen, it is important to remember two things. One, America has really risen to just about every great challenge it has been faced with in its long march from the swamp to the stars. And two, that immigrants have been at the core of that process, and the American project, and that they have been just so. When you look at the immigrants who fought in the Revolutionary War to the immigrants who make our country great today, they have been historically so much more a force for good than a force for evil, a force for bad. So much more a force for helping us achieve greatness than holding us back. That I just don't know how you could bet against immigrants or bet against our country thriving and prospering from having more of them. So thank you so much, Connor, for the chance to talk with you. I really enjoyed it. And Layman,
my pleasure.
Thanks for organizing this. I know it took a while, to get me down for that. So I really do appreciate that too. And folks here, I'll drop those links in the chat because they're really cool people, and I hope you check out what they do.
Thank you. And yeah, I was not disappointed at all. And that my expectations were at least met, perhaps exceeded. There was I minimally had to intervene, and I kind of expected that because you're both. I pick good ones. I pick the finest. Gabagoo. So yeah. Thank you both. And look, nobody's watching me right now. But if you're watching this on my channel, The links to both of them are in the description. You are more than welcome to subscribe to both of them because I would honestly, I think my politics are perfectly encapsulated by being half this guy and half of this guy. So, if you want to see me split in two, okay, see me split in two, these are the people to follow. So, thank you all for watching. Watching on whether it's Bastiat's stream or whether it's Connor's stream. Thank you. I'm really, really happy I was able to organize this as well as I did. I think the wait was worth it. And you all have a good night. Thank you.
You too.
All right. Appreciate y'all. Have a good one.
Take care. All right, folks, just a second. Let me put my camera back on. Turn that back on, and there we go. Okay. So what'd you guys think of that? What'd y'all think of that? Anybody listening? I know we've got some interesting folks here in the chat. Our great VIPs and other wonderful people here. I don't know. I thought that was pretty good. I know there's a lot of other stuff going on with Dave Chappelle and all the rest of it, you know, more timely and more compelling, you know, but I thought that was a good discussion. I teared up more than once. Oh my God, Violent Smoker, thank you. Makes me feel good. That was pretty good. Yeah, he said a lot, and I didn't keep up with all of it, you know, but I think I tried to really focus on the core of what he was talking about, so hopefully I made the points well and, you know, made the case somewhat persuasively. Glad you all enjoyed it. Globalist femboy, best kind of femboy, you know, other than femboy philosophy. Great, great to hear. What is this? Went well with all the Valium I ate. You made some amazing points I noted down to use myself. Right on. Thank you. Thanks, Globalist. I appreciate that. I thought him bringing 9/11 was a strange argument. Well, you know, I mean, it's not a strange argument, really. I mean, that was a failure that had to do with letting people in the country. And I guess my argument is that we ought to have more people in the country. So, you know, I get that. I get that. You know, that's good to hear, though, that I'm good on rhetoric. Normally people are like, oh, Vosh is better on rhetoric, you know. But, hey, you know, he does it more often. Okay, let me turn on some music here. Turn on some music while we talk about it some more. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know, but you know, apart from what you may think in terms of agreement with what he said, I don't know. How did that sound? How did all that sound? You say that every time I come and chat. I'm sorry, Globalist fanboy. I clearly got a crush here. Oh man, but it is great to see you. Great to have you here. Watching you young guys discuss gave this old woman some hope. Aw, well, thank you. Yeah, I just don't understand all negativity because I get it like on Twitter. Like last night we did the Twitter review where I reviewed all those people who wanted to do death threats on me, you know, but it's not real, man, you know. And it's a little real, you know. Actually, stuff with words probably makes it harder to hear me, huh? Let's see. Yeah, I don't care. I'll put it on anyway. Dika here says, kind of weird. A Native American wasn't speaking for closed borders, but instead there were two immigrants arguing over borders. I was born here. I'm as native as anyone else. I mean, I'm not saying I'm a Native American, but I have as much claim to this country as anyone else in the world. You know? He couldn't accept that immigrants are not criminal. They are very law-abiding. He seemed to accept that, but, you know, it's kind of weird to... It was kind of weird, like, though, because it seemed like he accepted it, but not so much, you know? I don't know. I wonder if there are any Native Americans who are actually opposed to you know, immigration generally. That would be interesting. Yeah, you're right, kind of, Deeker here. So it would be interesting to know what Native Americans think about the immigration issue, but I don't know, man. I can't say that normally they seem quick to say, you know, when I hear them make the arguments on the issue, it seems like they are normally like, how could you be against immigration, you immigrant? I don't know. So, but anyway, we are a strange nation. You're right about that. But I don't, yeah, I would be interested though, you know. Let's see. Land doesn't belong to anyone, George Chad. Well, look, I mean, clearly I believe in private property and all that, but what I don't really believe is that land can belong to, like, groups as a matter of, like, honor or, you know, birthright. You know, I tend to believe in, I guess, private property, and otherwise, you know, not really. Deborah McDonald says, those of us who were young leaders went off to pursue our own quests and fell out of politics and the morons took over. Well, hey, you know, I mean, you can't carry the burden forever. It falls upon a new generation, I suppose, to uphold the best of the old and improve upon it where they can. And, hey, you know, I mean, I know you called yourself an old woman, but at a certain point, you know, it's up to you to be able to, you know, it's your right to take a break and, you know, have somebody else pick up the torch, right? I'm not saying I'm picking up a metaphorical torch here or anything, you know, but I'm just saying you shouldn't feel obligated to be politically involved forever, you know. It's ultimately up to you to decide whether you want to be politically involved or what, right? I kind of feel like this with all the anti-mask fervor on his points on what Americans want over what they should do seem pretty accurate. Not 90 going into space anytime soon. There's still hope. Yeah, I just... Oh, and I want to thank our subs, by the way. Not Me Buddy, 123, thank you for subscribing. And Gappy V, thank you for subscribing as well. And folks, if there's anyone else who would like to subscribe to the channel, hey, feel free to do so. I sure do appreciate that. In the words of a great communist streamer, it's only $5. But anyway, Globalist Femboy, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. I hope you have a great night. And which are you on Twitter? I'm pretty sure you are. And I always when the Twitch username is different from the Twitter account name, I always get a little weird. You know, I always get a little mixed up. So but yeah, it's good to have you, buddy. You can also subscribe for free with your Twitch Prime or Amazon Prime if you got it. So please do subscribe if you'd like to. But you know, don't feel obligated. I am, after all, a good corporate shill, so I'll be just fine. But it does help. Let's see some of the other points here. Rat of the Lib. Oh, I love you. I love your account. I've been following you for a long time. It's so good to have you here, Retta. Thank you so much. And that means a lot that you came by. You know,